tampered with when you tamper with the Word of God. And Brother Stephen ended up his presentation a while ago talking about deception. You need to understand this part of it. The devil is pretty smart. Good men get deceived. Oftentimes it's their own weakness that opens the door to the devil, whether it be pride, ego, whatever it enters in sometime. And we do have to be careful that we understand that. Good men can make mistakes, but then also it's a mistake that just because they're good men, you go along with it, you ignore it. You don't take a stand against it. That's the way bad things happen. If you went back in the history of America, early churches, some of them we know as being so rank liberal today, we'd have considered fundamentalists 100 years ago or less. So that's the way it happens. And that's why we're always on guard. It's so good to have Brother Sam Gipp with us. Again, I respect him so much, and God's used him in such a mighty way. And I think you're fortunate to be able to get what you just got, what you are getting in this Bible conference, and what you're about to get from Brother Sam. Come on, please.
Well, amen. Oh, hang on a second. Is that okay? Okay. He's got a gun to his head. All right. Anyway, good to be saved, isn't it? Yeah, it sure is. Sure is. It's good to be in church on a Monday morning. I like to be in church when you're not supposed to be in church. You ever been in trouble for being where you weren't supposed to be? Oh, man. All right, Brother Stephen, very selfish. I wanted to use his computer like he did, but he's afraid my markers would mess up his screen. You had high tech, we go low tech here. But I'm going to talk to you about something that is, you'll hear this charge brought against your King James Bible. I'm going to tell you, I operate under a kind of an odd way of looking at things. I think you ought to be honest. Really, I think you ought to be honest. Wait a second. I think you ought to be honest when something like the truth may stand against you. Okay, and that is our problem. Our problem is that we will be honest as long as the facts hurt our opposition. But if the facts at all make them look a little correct, we may do the same thing. I'm going to talk to you about archaic words. You have heard that there are archaic words in your King James Bible. I don't know how many you've heard that there are. There's several thousand, several hundred, whatever the case may be. And I'm a Bible believer, guys. I really am. But sometimes, because we're Bible believers, we'll get statements like this. I've had guys, King James Bible believers, say, there are no archaic words in a King James Bible. Well, that's just simply not true. Okay? And you got to be at least honest enough to admit, truth. So when I say, get this out here, when I say that there are archaic words in the King James Bible, or archaic words in the Bible, I want to give you a list. You don't have to write this down. I'm going to give you these lists in a little while. You'd like that, don't you? When somebody tells you don't have to write this down. So use this time to make out a check in my name. Anyway, there are some words now archaic simply means passed from common usage. That's what they mean. That a word has passed from being used common or openly, and so you ought to admit that the word, like a right, we don't very often say a right unless you just hit him with a left. But we often don't say deride, unless you say deride was fun. Odious, if you don't say odious, you ought to ride on an elevator with a bunch of Europeans on a hot July day. That will add that one back into your glossary of terms. Trafficked, especially with that K. That K is that you look in your your Bible, it'll say public and has a K on the end, or music and have a K on the end, traffic and have a K on the end. That is admittedly archaic, okay? I love the King James Bible all you want, but you got to say that is just something that is passed from common usage unto. That is not something that we say. I was talking someplace, and this lady said, well, what do you mean unto is archaic? I said, well, do you ever say, I was talking unto my neighbor? I doubt it. And if you do, well, yeah, because I would talk like King James Bible. Well, knock it off. All right? You're messing up my lesson. Anyway, and yoke fellow is just, it's just not one of those things that we use commonly. When I say that there are archaic words in the Bible, or there are archaic words to be found, be honest, we don't say canst. We don't say didst. We don't say doest. We don't say dust. Some of you women should say dust. Actually, some of you men should say that to your wife, okay? Point at the table and go, dust. And then say, so dust. Guys, you can, look, pray all you want with thee and thine. I always like these guys that don't like the these and thous of the King James Bible and ask them to pray. Well, I know why they want to take them out of the King James Bible. They put them all in their prayer. But the truth is that we don't say thee and thine in our prayers or in common language, correct? Well, you guys don't even say yes to that. You think I'm a heretic. As a rule, we don't say beggarly. Now, I do think of this quite often at the freeway exit. We don't say begot. We don't say bemoan. We don't say paramours. Unless you have, you know what paramour is? That's two mores. We don't say warp. Though I was thinking of it a lot when Brother Stephen was talking. Anyway, but we don't say warp. We don't say wet. W-H-E-T. That's not wet like water. That's like you wet the edge of an axe to sharpen it. He doth not wet the edge. And all I'm saying, guys, is you got to be honest enough to say that archaic is archaic. Correct? I mean, if you're not going to be that honest, what are you going to do with your facts? It is not that Brother Stephen said we have facts. Oh, no. They got facts too. They just ignore them. Okay? Because they're not honest. So you have to admit that there's words like assuaged, and asunder, comely, milk, M-I-L-C-H. That's how you spell it, right? Nobody spells milk that way, right? All right. Surfeit. You only say that if you're out in California, you see a wave. And upbraided. Now, this has nothing to do with hair in Jamaica. Upbraided. Guys, all I'm saying is that when a word is archaic, you ought to admit that it is archaic. Denying that it is not there, what it really does, it just destroys your whole argument, because if you're not going to be honest in one place, you're not going to be honest in the next place, correct? And so I just want to be honest. Now, we will agree that basically, you might agree or disagree with one or two of these, but basically these words have passed from common usage. They are archaic. So I think we should be honest and admit that. Here's the problem. This column in red here isn't from a King James Bible. It's from the New International Version. And the second one, canst, didst, doest, dost, thee, and thine, isn't from a King James Bible. It's from a New American Standard Version. Beggarly, begot, bemoan, paramers, wait, warp, and wet are not from a King James Bible. They're from a New King James Version. And this list here is from the New Revised Standard Version. Now, the reason I showed you that, and wherever those are, if I could have a couple of, can I have two guys? Can I have you two guys here? Two guys? Two men. Are there two men in this room? All right. Right there in that manila envelope is this list. You just pass those out to everybody. Anyway, now the reason I show you this is because I want you to realize that there's a little bit of dishonesty when people say they don't like archaic words in the King James Bible. Have you ever heard anybody say that? You know, they go, well, I just have a problem with the archaic words in the King James Bible. I think that is the problem. You have a problem with the archaic words in the King James Bible, but not the archaic words in every other version. It's kind of like the United States. We get beat on for every flaw that we have in our society. I hear these people go, well, you ought to really see how dirty the restaurants are in your restaurant, the dirty the kitchens are in your restaurants. Okay, well, let's go to India and look at them. Let's go look at the restaurant kitchen in China. How about Mexico, guys? Okay? Now, all I'm saying is, if you have a problem with dirty kitchens in restaurants, why only one country? When you only point out one, that makes me think you're not very honest. It's not like you're really upset with dirty restaurant kitchens. You're upset with the United States and just finding something to complain about. Well, that's my problem here. If somebody says, I don't like the archaic words in the King James Bible, say, no, you mean you don't like archaic words? Yeah, that's it, archaic words. Well, then, there's archaic, because you ever heard anybody say this? Well, I just don't like those archaic words in that NIV. You're not getting me to use the New King James, not with all those archaic words. You see, but those archaic words keep people from understanding the truth of God. Isn't that what they say? Well, wouldn't they affect them in a modern translation? So if somebody says, now look, I'm going to tell you how to work this. Now, Brother Dennis is here, and Brother Dennis and I are fishing partners. Actually, we're hiking partners with fishing poles. You have to go fishing with Dennis Coral. First thing you do is get a fishing pole? No, hiking boots. And learn to climb fences. We used to go fishing in Montana. I'd fish one day a year because that's all I could take. But I knew we were in trouble. We climbed fence. I knew we was in trouble when a Canadian border guard turned us back. And I'm not a good fisherman, but I've come to realize what my main problem is. Next time I go fishing, I'm going to light the bait before I throw it in the water. But here's the problem. I'm not good at catching fish, but I can catch people. Okay? Now I'm going to tell you how to use this. Fold that up and just leave it in your Bible. And then when somebody starts challenging your King James Bible because of the archaic words, say, oh, those archaic words bother you? Oh, yes. I mean, you have a real problem with archaic words. Yeah, you have a problem with words like aright and odious and trafficked with a K. Yeah, I have a real problem with that. You probably don't like those these and doest and didst. Yeah, that's exactly what bothers me. I mean, guys, set the hook and reel them in. And then when you got them saying all those words are bad, say, well, every word that I just quoted to you, I didn't get them out of King James Bible. I got them out of the NIV. I got them out of the New American Standard. I got them out of the New King James. I got them out of the New Revised Standard Version. Do you still have a problem with those archaic words?
Come on, brother, preach.
Now, here's what you're going to do. You say, oh, you're going to convince them? No, you're going to catch them.
That's right.
You'll catch them. And here's what I try to get them to do. Get them to admit that they are not honest. Get them to not admit it, to face it. They're not going to admit it, but they're going to have to face it. Say, now look, if you don't like archaic words, I understand that, but if you don't like archaic words only in the King James Bible, but you accept them and everything else, your honesty is in question. Your sincerity is in question, right? So just have fun with this. Just reel them in. But we still have a problem. And the problem is there are archaic words in the King James Bible, right? Now, as a rule, I don't call people names, but I'm going to call a guy a name. And I'm gonna call them two names because they're true. There's a fellow who wrote a book some years ago by the name of Jack Lewis. Jack Lewis wrote this book called, now listen to the title of this book, An Evaluation of the Versions. Has a stack of Bibles on the cover, and it's called an Evaluation of the Versions. Now, does that title kind of infer that he looked at all, or he's going to look at all the versions and objectively say, here's what's right, here's what's good about them, here's what's bad about them, etc. And you go to the table of contents of Jack Lewis's book, and the chapter on the New International Version, you know what it's entitled? The New International Version. I thought that was kind of catchy. The chapter on the New American Standard, and by the way, I'll just let you know, the only good American Standard Version is made out of porcelain. All right? I pastored a church in upstate New York. We thought so highly of the American Standard Version, we built 2 entire rooms just for our American Standard Version. In fact, I found you can use the American Standard and the King James same time. Anyway, the chapter on the New American Standard Version is simply entitled the New American Standard Version. The chapter on the New King James is simply called the New King James. They call it Bible, I call it Version. Chapter on Good News for Modern Man. You guys know the formal title for that is Today's English Version, and so that's what it's called. Now, what do you think the chapter on the King James Bible should be? Should it be the King James Bible or the King James Version or the Authorized Version? I mean, that's what it should be, one of those 3, correct? You know what the title for the King James is? Doctrinal Problems in the King James Version. Now, guys, I've been doing this for about 40 years, and I've heard a lot of charges against this book here. Doctrinal charges or doctrinal problems is not one of them. When you consider that most of our doctrines we got from this book. And so I thought, well, I got to find out how this guy defines a doctrine, and that is the key. And I looked it up. Here's how he defines a doctrine. A doctrinal problem is any place in the Bible that a doctrine is not taught clearly. Now, come on, man. This is like a magician, okay? But I'm going to accept it. See, you thought I'm going to resist him. I'm not. I'm accepting it. I'm accepting that a doctrinal problem is any place a doctrine is not clearly taught, and so therefore there are doctrinal problems in the King James Version. My only problem is I now think that the title for the chapter on the New International Version should be Doctrinal Problems in the New International Version, and Doctrinal Problems in the New American Standard Version, and Doctrinal Problems in the New King James Version, because I got news for you, bucko. If you can find me one verse here where a verse doesn't teach a doctrine clearly, I can probably show you 5 in every one of those. Now, here's what I say, guys. When you get a book, if you can't get past the table of contents, really, if you can't get past the table of contents without the guy trying to hook you or mislead you, misguide you, that is deceit. But if you can't get past the table of contents, I'm going to give you kind of an idea of what you're going to find in the book. So that's one of the reasons that I call Jack Lewis a deceiver. But I told you he was a deceiver and a liar, right? I'd say that if he's sitting here. You probably wouldn't understand it, but I'd say it. Okay. The reason is that in this book called An Evaluation of the Versions, he has a little paragraph. He has a little paragraph that is a list, a paragraph of archaic words in the King James Bible. He says there's like 300 of them, and I don't think there's 300 of them. I might tell you this. It's been a standard teaching that if you just read the context, you kind of get the idea. Ladies, before there was a Hoover, what did they sweep with? None of you have probably swept with a broom. But anyway, it's a broom. It's a long wooden handle, has straw at the end. No cord, no batteries. But anyway, that's what you swept with. You swept with a broom. So when you read in Isaiah, I will sweep you with the besom of destruction, B-E-S-O-M, what do you reckon they're sweeping with? A besom must be a broom. The context to take care of it. So he's got this list. And in this list, he has listed as an archaic word this. Talitha Kumi. He has that in the list of archaic words. Can I tell you something? That's not archaic. That's Aramaic. That's the truth. I mean, it's like me putting an Italian word saying, see, that's archaic. No, it's a different language. Now, maybe he's not being deceitful. Maybe he's only stupid. I never called him stupid. I could grant him that one. But then in this list, he has this. in a list of archaic words in your King James Bible, he has sanctum, sanctorum. Now, I'm staying at some campground somewhere out here, in the great out here. And my wife and I bought a new motorhome 2 months ago, and I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to somebody in this room. If you'll bring me your King James Bible and show me sanctum sanctorum, not in the margin where you put it in. Okay, I know you're crooked. I already know that. But guys, this doesn't even appear in the Bible. You say, what's that? That's a lie. So, Jack Lewis is a deceiver and a liar. But if he does say this, there are archaic words in the King James Bible, we have to admit that. But let me ask you a question, guys. Don't we say this about the Bible? Don't we say the Bible is our final authority in all matters of faith and practice, right? I hate to say this. I'm talking about you. I'm not talking about somebody outside this room. When you say the Bible is my final authority in all matters of faith and practice, that is just a line you say yes to. You don't even believe it. Here's what you really mean. When you say the Bible is my final authority in all matters of faith and practice, you mean the Bible is where I get my doctrine from. That's what you mean. If the Bible is our, you know what final authority is? Final authority is that after you have voiced your opinion, we tell you how it's going to be anyway. Right? I mean, come on, I'm a father, man. I went to the classes. I've got the diploma. And so I know how to handle, a kid's opinion. Because I said so. That's how it works. You know what that is? That's the final, but I don't want to go. What? Somebody tell you your opinion counted? Next thing you know, you think you're human. But the fact is that after, I'm serious, guys. We've gotten to this point where we all think our opinion's just so important. They painted the bathrooms and nobody asked what I thought. Well, that's because they didn't care. Because they understood the value of your opinion. But after you voiced your opinion, the final authority is, that's how it is, correct? Now, this book is our final authority in what? All matters. That's the part you have trouble with. You say, oh, come on, preacher. Don't tell me the Bible's our final authority in how to handle archaic words. Well, if it isn't, then you are, or I am, or Jack Lewis is, right? Now, there are archaic words in the King James Bible, but we're going to go, we're going to look at an archaic word. In fact, let's look at two. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I'm not showing you anything there. I just want to see if it's in your version. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, look what it says in verse 25. Whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake. Believe me, I have held that verse in, I've taken that one literally in some countries, brother. I made the mistake one time of asking what some food was. And it's really, if you can get past your taste buds, you're better not knowing some things. But it says whatsoever is sold in the shambles. Guys, do you know what that shambles is? That's talking about a grocery store or marketplace. Now, I don't think we call it a shambles, right? That's past. Now, I would say that's past from common usage in our country. You would be amazed that probably that would fit the definition of a marketplace in about 80% of the world. I hate to tell you, they just don't all have automatic doors and air conditioning and carts. All the homeless guys already took them. I don't know what homeless people do in some of these countries. What do they steal? There's no carts. Can you imagine you talk about homeless in this country? Can you imagine being homeless in another country, no grocery cart to steal, no interstate to hold a sign by? I mean, what do? They stand out by somebody's fish market thing, fish stand going, we'll work for food. I don't know what they do. They probably can't afford cardboard and a marker. All homeless people come complete with one piece of cardboard and a marker. So the word shambles, and by the way, that does describe many marketplaces. I was talking to a missionary one time, and he said I can't remember what country it was, and really could fill in the blank because it's a bunch of them, but he went down to the market and he said he saw this black thing hanging out in the air. And he said, when I wondered what it was, the shape looked familiar, but I didn't know just what it was. And he said, when I went to touch it, all of the flies flew away, and I recognized it as meat, which I got to admit would probably tend to make even me look for a salad. So, but here's the problem. Now, all right, how do we handle this? If we admit that shambles is archaic, now we have a problem. How do we handle it? And now you come up with your opinion. Well, I think we ought to just scratch out shambles and put in marketplace. I think we need to form a committee and update the King James Bible and take shambles out and put marketplace in it. But guys, let me ask you a question. Have you been around long enough yet to know that you've gotten into trouble when you thought you had a better way of handling something than God did? I haven't asked Brother Mickey about this, but I guarantee it's true of every pastor. You'd be amazed how many times people come in and counsel with a pastor, and he'll say, well, here's what the Bible says you should do, and they'll go, okay, and then walk out and do what they wanted to do. Anyway, they thought they had a better way of handling it than the Bible did. So we're going to look at another place where there's an archaic word. We're going to go to a book with a good, honest sounding name. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 9. 1 Samuel chapter 9. 1 Samuel chapter 9, there is an archaic word in this chapter. That's not the big deal. The big deal is that in 1 Samuel chapter 9, we find out how the Bible deals with it, how our final authority. Now, guys, look, you may disagree with how God handles this, but God's never wrong. You know, it's not wrong. It's not wrong if you are going through something or there's something in your life you're not crazy about, for you to say, God, I disagree with what's going on in my life. That's not a bad thing. As long as you finish by saying, but I know who the idiot is in this picture. You say, you ever pray that? I have prayed those exact words. You know, Brother Mickey and I disagree with something. He thinks he's right, and I know I'm right. But the fact is, I think I'm right, but he might be. That'd be a rare thing, but he might be right. Or he may think he's right, but I am. But, you know, here's the nice thing. When I disagree with God, it's so nice because I know I'm always wrong. I don't ever have to wonder. I've told God this in prayer. I know you're not wrong. I just don't know why you're right. Right? You been through that? Okay. And all I'm saying is that you may not even like the way God handles this. Who cares? God shows us how it's done. That's the final authority. Don't give him your opinion. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. Now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zorah, the son of Bachrath, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any of the people. And the asses of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And Kish said to Saul, his son, take now one of the servants with thee, and arise, go seek the asses. All right, so here's what happens. Kish had this group of Democrats. And they got lost, which I can understand that because they can't find their way out of a phone booth. What I don't understand is he actually wanted them back. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a modern interpretation. He had these jackasses, these donkeys, and they got lost. So he tells his kid, take one of the servants and go find them and bring them back. Well, apparently they got really lost because they're gone for a while. And apparently Saul's a teenager because he's lucky to find his feet. If he starts at the knees and works down, he can't find his feet. So they can't find him. They go all over the place, can't find him. So look what it says. Oh, let's see, verse 5. And when they were come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant that was with him, come and let us return, lest my father leave caring for the asses and take thought for us. And he said, this is the servant talking, he said, behold, there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man. All that he saith cometh surely to pass. Now let us go thither. Peradventure he can show us our way that we should go. Now before I read the next verse, I got to tell you, you talk about things becoming archaic. We're about to read about a tradition, I guess, or a policy that has fallen out of common usage that I really wish we could bring back. They never asked a man of God a question unless they gave him something. Whoa, who stopped that one? All right, you guys, I am a question magnet. And I mean, people that really shouldn't even eat with silverware or they will hurt themselves. And then they come up and try to act intelligent when they ask a question. We'll find that out when I'm done here. But, yeah, it's your help, it's your help. Because if it costs you something, look, if your stupid question costs you something, you might not ask your stupid question. Really? If you had to pay to ask somebody a question, don't you pay to ask a doctor a question? Yeah. Don't you pay to ask a mechanic a question? I'm just trying to teach a little doctrine here. Verse 7. Then said Saul to his servant, but behold, if we go, what have we? Or what shall we bring the man? For the bread is spent in our vessels, and there is not a present to bring the man of God. What have we? Now, before I continue reading, here's what I want you to do. I just want you to do this. Look, just look. And look at verse 8, look at verse 9, and look at verse 10. Just look at it. What do you notice different about one of the verses? Yes, sir. Which verse? Verse 9. All right. Verse 9 is in parentheses. Do you know what a parenthesis is? A parenthesis is not part of the narrative that you're reading, but it's not a necessary part. A parenthesis is a note from the author to the reader. Example, I could be writing somebody a letter today, and I'd say, I'm in Haines City, Florida, parenthesis, and Mickey Carter's church, parenthesis. Now, if I didn't put that in, it's not necessary. They still know I'm in Haines City, Florida. You understand? And so, now I didn't say that verse 9 is not inspired. Oh, man, it is inspired. And I'm not saying that it is not unnecessary. I'm saying it's not part of the narrative. Now, to prove my point, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read verse 8, and then I'm going to read verse 10. I'm going to skip over verse 9, and you're going to see that there's not a gap in this narrative. Look at verse 8. And the servant answered Saul again and said, behold, I have here at hand a fourth part of a shekel of silver. That will I give to the man of God to tell us our way. Then said Saul to his servant, well said, come, let us go. So they went unto the city where the man of God was. Now, did you notice there wasn't anything missing? Right? In the narrative. But here's what God knows amongst everything. Here's what God knows. He knows that you and I are about to run into an archaic word in this passage. So before we get to that archaic word, here is what he tells us. Look at verse 9. Before time in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, come, let us go to the seer, for he that is now called a prophet was before time called a seer. Here's what you just got told. You just got told that when this took place, a man of God was known as a seer. But when this was recorded in writing, a man of God was known as a prophet. Yeah. That very thing has happened in this country. If you go back 150 years, and your pastor went downtown, which he'd have been an old man even then, but if he went downtown, if he was a pastor here 150 years ago, they'd say, hello, parson. Yeah, that's right. Because that's what they called a pastor. Right. He which before time was called a parson is now called a pastor. That's right. Now, he might take his car down to the mechanic or something, and they'll say, hello, parson, but it's a joke. They'll just say that. But we don't say, my parson told me this. We say what? My pastor told me this. So parson has gone into, has become an archaic word. It has fallen out of common usage and it's been replaced by pastor. That's what happened here. The guy they used to say, let's go talk to the seer. Now they'd say, when this was written, they'd say, let's go talk to the prophet. Now let's read verse 9 again, and we'll go after an archaic word. Before time, let me tell you something about verse 9. There's something verse 9 flips my switch. Verse 9 excites me. Now, I know verse 9 probably doesn't do anything for you. I know I really like verse 7 about getting money when you ask me questions. But verse 9 really does. You know why? Don't you believe that God wrote the Bible to you? I do too. Isn't it something that God would write the Bible to us? But here's what verse 9 does for me. Because it's not a necessary part of the narrative, it's just a note from the writer to the reader. I am excited not only because God wrote me the whole book, but every now and then he put a little note to me. My goodness, guys, do you understand what care that is from your Creator, that he would write to you and go, my son Gipp, he ain't gonna understand this. I better tell stupid He that before time was called a seer is now called a prophet. Man, I appreciate that God not only wrote me the book, but he wrote me a note. He wrote, and he wrote several. Don't mess with those parentheses. Before time in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, come and let us go to the seer, for he that is now called a prophet was before time called a seer. Then said Saul to his servant, well said, come, let us go. So they went unto the city where the man of God was. And as they went up the hill to the city, they found young maidens going out to draw water, and said unto them, is the prophet here? Is that what it says? Pardon me? Oh, it doesn't say prophet. Is prophet here? What's it say? Wait a second, guys. Wait, are you trying to tell me that God himself, who does rank a little higher than you or I or anybody you know, that God himself won't change one word of the text? That God himself, his method of handling archaic words is not to scratch them out and put the new meaning in, or take the word out and put a modern translation in. That God, our final authority in writing, showed us that if we have a problem with an archaic word, then what you do is you explain it. But you don't change the text. Look at verse 18. Then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate and said, tell me, I pray thee, where the seer's house is. I don't think they was looking for them all. They were looking for the house of the prophet, but he was known as the seer. Now, here's what I'm saying. If back here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 25, there is nothing wrong if a preacher stands behind his pulpit, he's reading 1 Corinthians chapter 10, comes down to verse 25, and says, that which was sold in the shambles. And said, now folks, what they used to call a shambles, we call a marketplace or a grocery store. Nothing wrong with that. That's just what happened. But when he says, now you see that word shambles, well, there's just no telling how your spiritual growth has been stunted by that archaic word. You all look just a little demented just because of that word in a King James Bible. So scratch shambles out and put marketplace, because that's a better translation and that's more up to date. Well, that's not what God taught us. Or if the guy says, yes, you see this word shambles. Here's how they started out. I love the King James Bible. I just worry about those guys. I really do. I mean, look, when a guy starts out going, now you know, nobody loves the King James Bible any more than I do. You know what word should be coming into your mind? Does anybody know? But. Because in the middle of the sentence, that's the word that's going to be there. I love the King James Bible. I use only a King James Bible. I wouldn't have another Bible, another version, one of those modern versions in my pulpit. Of course, you'd have it in a study. But I wouldn't have it in my pulpit. And they'd say, but. Hey, can I give you guys a thought? Because I know you don't think. What would you do if a man stood behind the pulpit and talked about how much he loved his wife, he loves his wife, he loves his wife, he loves his wife, he loves his wife, and then when you're talking to him, you say, oh yeah, your wife was saying, what do you mean, you can't believe her? She ain't got any sense. But my secretary told me this, and my secretary's very smart. Well, yeah, well, your wife said, yeah, that's my wife, man. I mean, you know, look, it's for the strategic oil reserve. There's nothing up there. But my secretary was telling me this the other day, and my secretary knows what she's talking about. Would you wonder about somebody who publicly says they love their wife, but they take all of their advice from some other woman? I didn't say they're committing adultery, but it does sound like somebody else has got his heart. And somebody stands behind the pulpit and says, I only use a King James Bible here, and then they go to the office and study out of something else. You better think about that. I love the King James Bible. You know, but I study out of modern translation because, you know, because of what? That's right, and you mock the one that you preach out of. So, here's what we found. My final authority, which, by the way, my final authority is not the president of a college. My final authority is not the pastor of a church. My final authority is not the greatest soul winner I've ever met, the most godly man I know, or the guy that led me to Christ or married my wife. Oh, my final authority doesn't stare back at me from the mirror. My final authority is a piece of paper, but not any piece of paper. It's that one. And my final authority tells me that when I see an archaic word in a passage, there is nothing wrong with me saying, now guys, what they called a besom, we call a broom. But there's something wrong if I think I should scratch besom out and put room in. Or there's something wrong with me if I say, well, here's what we need. We need to update this translation. Hey guys, you know what that marker taught you? That marker board? See, you think I was showing you here that what I want to show you here was that all modern translations have archaic words. No, that's not what I want to show you at all. You know what I'll show you? Didn't the translators, when they sat down of every one of these translations, one of their mandates was, oh, those archaic words in that old 1611 King James Bible messed people up, so we're going to bring one out that doesn't have the archaic words in it?
Preach.
And everyone does. You know what that proves? It can't be done.
Amen, brother.
It simply can't be done. I'm going to tell you, some of the men on these translation committees, now I know I'm not allowed to say this in the United States because all men are created equal. But some of these people are smarter than you. And they were better educated than you. And they couldn't get the archaic words out of the book.
That's right. Amen.
So if a guy came up to me and said, I just have a problem with these archaic words, I think we need to have a translation that doesn't have them in there anymore. You know what I know? It cannot be done.
That's right, brother.
It has never been done. People smarter than me, better educated than me, couldn't do it.
Right.
Where do you think you're going to do it?
Amen.
Besides, that isn't the way to do it. My final authority showed me all I got to do is explain the word.
Amen, brother.
But, let's see, how many of you, I use an old Schofield. Now, I don't read his notes, okay, unless I want to laugh. But there's a couple things about the layout of an old Schofield Bible that I like. And one of the things, I don't know if this thing will write. I think mine says this, 1095. That's a 5, honest. Yeah, it's a lot better. That'll be better. I'm going to end up in Congress yet. All right. I got 1095 BC. You guys, anybody got a date? Is that about what you got? I got 1095 BC in here in 1 Samuel chapter 9. Did you know that they have dates in the Bible? Some of you really look like you just got off the boat, you know. Does anybody have a date at the top of the page of their Bible? Thank you, brother. You are. What do you have?
1095.
Good, because if you say anything else, I'd thrown you out. All right. Now, I want you to go with me, if you will, to 2 Chronicles chapter 29. And I got to tell you why I look up to the Presbyterians. Presbyterians impressed me a number of years ago. Now, I'm a Baptist. And I believe all the Baptist doctrines, which is, somebody asked me why I'm a Baptist. I said, well, I'm a Baptist because eating is one of the ordinances of our church. And I think swimming is the other one. And Baptists fight about everything. You did know that. Baptists fight about everything. Split. Baptists split churches all the time. If I ever pastor another church, I'm going to call it Amoeba Baptist Church. I figure just get so big and then boom. You know? My assistant pastor will start a church right across the street because God led him to do it. But I got to tell you what happened. A number of years ago, I was in Scotland, and this missionary took me by to this Presbyterian church. Now it was a grand building. It was built more like the Catholic churches, you know, big gray stone building, arched, vaulted ceilings. And back in, I want to say 1600s, these Presbyterians had a split. I'm amazed. Presbyterian split. But get this, these people had a split, but nobody left the building. You know what they did? Both congregations met in the same sanctuary at opposite ends at the same time, and they just built a wall, a great wall of partition. So you got people, I mean, they didn't have a parking lot. But anyway, they're going in, here's this building, and they're going in opposite ends and never speaking to each other. Wow. And that wall and those two congregations met in that building till 1929. This guy was telling me it was 350 years. Wow. And I was impressed. I mean, I thought us Baptists knew something about splitting a church. I said the Presbyterians had a church split that is older than my country. Right? You just got to be impressed with that. But I say that 350 years because in my Schofield, I've got this for a date here in 2 Chronicles. That's basically 350 years later. I'm going to say this. If something is archaic today, it's probably archaic 350 years from now. And I want you to look at your inspired Bible. Look at verse 25. And he set the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals, with psalteries, and with harps, according to the commandment of David and of Gad the king's, what's the word? Whoa, whoa, whoa. You've got an archaic word. Now, it's not after it passed from common usage. This is like 350 years after it passed from common usage. Now, I know what our opponents are going to say. They're going to say, well, it probably should have been translated prophet, and those King James translators translated seer. Well, I might get fooled by that if I didn't read the rest of the verse. Of Gad the king's seer and Nathan the prophet. Ain't that just like God to use both words in the same verse? You know, God just has fun with these guys. But now wait a second. Don't we believe that the words in this book were put there because God told the writer to put them in there? And God told the writer of that book in one verse to put the word seer and the word prophet. Two different words. He told him to put both words in the same verse. Now that can only tell me one thing. Listen very carefully, because this is not a joke. Maybe sometimes God prefers an archaic word. Maybe he does. I mean, did you ever see anybody build brand new furniture and then paint it like an antique? Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it is. They poke holes in it and put paint on it and then wipe it back off and make it look like it's 1,000 years old or 100 years old or whatever, and then they sell it like it is. But anyway, that's what some people prefer. Now, can I ask you a question? Don't you think being God, don't you think one of the perks of the job is he ought to get the word he prefers?
That's right, brother.
I was talking about getting a steak cooked, and I said I like to cook medium rare, and this cook who must have had a conviction against that kept, just grilling this sucker like my shoe soles. It was cooked solid all the way through. Well, wait a second, man. Now, that's a preference, how I like my steak. Okay? You can like your steak well cooked or raw. I don't care. That's my preference. But don't tell me I've got to eat it the way you like it. I'm not telling you you have to have a medium rare steak. So you're going to tell God, I don't like your choice of words. This is why I'm going to enjoy the judgment seat of Christ. I will be the guy way back, you hear back there, laughing occasionally when some of these guys stand up. Well, God, it was okay for 350 years. What are you doing? Are you out of here? Well, yes, sir. Yeah, you're God, that's right. Right? So, guys, your final authority, number one. First off, there's three things here. Number one, I want you to know that all versions have modern translations, modern versions have archaic words in them, and that these were written with the intention of getting rid of those words, and they still got in. Which not only tells me that if archaic words are bad. See, I don't always dispute these guys' claim. If they say, I think archaic words are bad, I'm going to say, okay, I agree. Maybe that'd be a good thing for you to do. Just say, yeah, I agree. I think archaic words are bad. And then tell them what they are. And have them just have them nodding. Just set the hook and reel them in. But this also proves that even when they try to take the archaic words out, they can't get them out. But then watch the reaction of the person you show this to. And if they start going like this, why, none of these translations are pure of archaic words. They all have archaic words. I don't like that at all. Then it's okay. Then since they all have archaic words, why don't we just stick with the best one?
Amen, brother. Amen.
But I doubt they'll do that. Probably what they'll say is, well, yeah. And you start making excuse for the adversaries to the perfect book. Then the second thing I wanted you to see was 1 Samuel chapter 9 shows you the way that our final authority deals with archaic words, which is not scratch it out, which is not update it, which is not take out one word. Listen, if God won't take out one word, I really don't think you ought to trump God's idea. But it tells us that if we're coming up on an archaic word, we can explain what that word means, but we don't take it out of the text, and we don't say we need to update the text, and we don't say anything derogatory about the text. And then the third thing, 350 years after that word was archaic, God used an archaic word 350 years after it passed from common usage. I mean, it's kind of like, see, we could say that 1 Samuel was like transitional, where sometimes they were calling him prophet, and sometimes they were calling him seer. Surely there was a time in this country when sometimes he had been called parson and sometimes pastor. But after 350, I'd say we've made the change. And God chose an archaic word. And if that's God's preference, could I ask you a question? Why the Lamb of God? Why the Lamb of God? Well, because the Old Testament said, okay, why did God choose a lamb in the Old Testament? Why didn't he choose a squirrel? Well, I mean, yeah, see, you laugh. But if he just said the squirrel of God, you'd think, who'd ever say a lamb? Right? There's a lot of animals out there that God could have chosen, correct? And he chose a lamb. And we never question that, which I don't think we should. But what I'm saying is, somewhere God just said, I want it to be a lamb. Now, you can come up with your 3-point sermon and poem on why it's a lamb. But the fact is, it may not be till we get on the other side we'll really find out why. You say, God, it was probably because of this and the purity of the lamb and this, and there's so much like humanity. No, I just really don't like lambs. Maybe that's what it's saying. Yeah, no, I just really never liked them. They're right just above cats for me. But guys, here's all I'm saying. Hey, why couldn't he say cat? Why couldn't he say the dog? I'm talking some bozo is going to translate the Bible into another language out on some South Seas island, and he goes, they don't know what a lamb is, but a pig is great value. And he thinks that the word ought to be translated the pig of God. Oh, wait a second, guy, I don't know why you're laughing. That's what this guy's going to call Jesus Christ. Do you want to look at Jesus Christ and say, behold, the pig of God that taketh away the sin of the world? You know what the guy didn't do, though? Now you say, well, yeah, but he's just trying to make a good translation. Well, I don't understand why he didn't do something with snow. You know, white as snow. I'm sure it's never snowed on that South Seas island. Maybe he just explained to those people what snow was. And if he can do that, why couldn't he just explain what a lamb is? All right? So that's it on archaic words. And if you have questions, and you don't have to pay. You don't have to pay. You may pay one way or another, but anyway, you don't have to pay. But if you have a question, but while you're trying to think of your question, let me tell you what the bottom line on this is. The bottom line is pride. And I'm not talking about somebody's pride who's outside this building. The greatest Bible corrector, greatest Bible hater has a great deal of pride, and some of you have the same pride. And the book says in Job chapter 41, it talks about Leviathan being the devil, and it said he is the king over the children of pride. You know what that means? That means you may worship Jesus Christ, but you'll obey your king. A number of years ago, I was reading Air Force magazine. This was when not Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was president. And the fellow that was the Air Force Chief of Staff was a guy named General Merle McPeak. Merle McPeak, Clinton came into office saying, I want women in combat. And Merle McPeak said, I do not think women belong in combat. Now that's quite a problem because his commander-in-chief thinks they ought to be there. And I've got this quote, I've got it in a message. Merle McPeak, after Clinton said women are going to go into combat, Merle McPeak, somebody asked him, and he said, well, I got to voice how I felt, and I'm comfortable with the decision. You say, he crawdadded, he's gutless. No, he obeyed his commander-in-chief. And you know what's wrong with some of you? You'll listen all day long with the King James Bible. You'll still use another version because your commander-in-chief is going to deal with your pride, and you're going to have to go along with this. And how this all boils down, guys, it's been said very simplistically, and I like that word simplistic myself. I think truth should be simple. But here's what it comes down to. Either that book is in subjection to you, or you are in subjection to that book. And that really is the bottom line. And There are some people that when they think about being in subjection to a book, even one that they pay lip service to as loving it and believing it's perfect and believing it came from God, but when they look at that book and it makes a statement and they disagree with that statement and they know they have no recourse because it's their final authority, they rise up. That pride. And your pride will rise up too. And so you just need to check yourself. I mean, catch yourself. You understand? Best thing you can do is read that book every single day. It'll have a good influence on your wicked flesh. And bottom line is look, let me tell you about Bible correctors, all right? Bible correctors have the same philosophy as evolutionists. And I'm not calling them names. But there's two kinds of evolutionists. You know what they are? There's the kid that graduates from high school believing in evolution because they told him that. He didn't know any better. His biology teacher told him, millions and millions of years ago, blah, blah, blah. So he comes out quoting that. And I'll tell you what, you talk to that guy, give him some facts, and you can change him. But then there's the teacher that taught him. That guy knows all the evidence. And you know what he knows? He knows the evidence doesn't prove evolution. So why does he believe it? Because he had this thought go through his head. He may not have said it in the exact words I'm saying it, but I'm telling you the Spirit tapped him on the shoulder and communicated. Here's what he said. Well, of course evolution is true. Because if evolution isn't true, then the Bible is true. If the Bible is true, then I'm a sinner, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to go to... I believe in evolution. You understand? It's a heart issue. Same thing with a Bible corrector. A Bible corrector, there's two kinds of Bible correctors. There's the Bible corrector that comes out of a college like this one. I know this is not going to teach you to be a Bible corrector, but what I mean is, it's a Bible college, and they come out saying, well, this word better translated this way, and take the italics out, and blah, blah, blah. But give them some facts, and you can get them straightened out. Because they're only parroting what they were taught. But then there's the teacher. And the teacher knows. That's why they attack humans. They know the facts don't prove their point. But at some point, maybe it wasn't these exact words, but at some point they said, well, of course there's no perfect Bible on earth. By the way, these guys are not against the King James Bible. They're not. If we here today said the King James Bible is not the perfect Word of God, the New American Standard Version is, then next week they'd be railing on the New American Standard Version. Don't text in the room, please.
Amen, brother.
Whoever is texting, put your phone away.
Preach.
Because your text is not as important as anything that's going to go on here. Just trying to spread the love. Anyway, and so it's the concept. Here's what they said. Of course there's no perfect Bible on earth. Because if there's a perfect Bible, then I'm going to be held responsible to read it and change the way I live according to what it says and agree with it when I don't like what it said. No, there's no perfect Bible anywhere. That's the problem. All right? Okay, any questions? Any questions? Dare you ask? Can't take it, huh? What's that? Oh, okay. I thought you were coming forward. Finally got a conviction. Man, whole place is going to applaud. Okay. Anybody got a question? Any question about the King James Bible? Yes, sir.
Can you recommend any books specifically for the extent of manuscripts to study for what the actual manuscripts, the history of the manuscripts are from a Bible-believing point of view, rather than say like Bible-believing study or D.A. Waite's book or anything like that?
Well, Waite's book wouldn't be a Bible believer study.
Right.
And even Hill's was good, but he was more a TR man than a King James man. Ruckman's manuscript evidence would have some stuff, but it wouldn't tell you everything that's in the manuscripts. I'm working on a book. It's gonna list. I've been working on it for like 7 years. It's gonna list every manuscript, its date, where it is, how it lines up, what portion of Scripture. Some what they call a manuscript is about like this, and some of it is like that. Okay. Anyway, and so, but brother, Kurt Allen has a list of manuscripts. I can't say the word. I can't say the title because it's in German. It's known among scholars as the K list. And it is in German, but it lists the manuscripts. It doesn't give all of the information that needs to be given. The one I'm working on will list all the manuscripts, tell you, I've even got the name of some of the scribes that wrote them, tell you where they are on earth today. It will group them by Antiochian or Alexandrian or D, or believe it or not, you think there's only Alexandrian and Antiochian, but there's actually 4 classes. There's Antiochian, Alexandrian, there's D, which is kind of an aberration, and then there's non-classified. Because that little piece, it can't be classified. They'll say, this is definitely a part of John, but we can't tell you what, it could be out of any family. And the manuscripts that back that are in the non-classified group are larger than the Alexandrian group. There's more non-classified manuscripts than there are of ones against your King James Bible. But till that book's out, brother, I can't tell you one. Get that K list by Kurt Allen. I've been looking for the 94th. There's 1963 and 1994, and I've been trying to scare up a 94 edition. I can't find one. And don't come up and tell me about eBay, guys. Don't come up and tell me about it. Don't tell me about the web's going to get it for me. I've already bought it 3 times and then had them come back and say, we can't find it. So thank you for your computer. Understandable history would help you. And if it wouldn't help you, at least it'd help me if you bought it. Do you have a question, brother? You standing? Oh, I see you got a mic. Back there, brother. Right back there.
Thank you. The question I raise is relating to the Bible College. The fact that you train people who will go to other countries as missionaries, say to Asia, to Africa, the United States. Of course, the British English and the American English tend to be a little bit different. Now, I do note that there is a struggle even within the English language of translating words from the archaic language into what is acceptable within the culture. The question I raise now, I come from Africa, is when the local languages struggle with the meaning of words, and then we as missionaries go into those countries with the Bible, and we have to translate, like you would say, the pig of God, the lamb of God, where they have to struggle with what is understood in that culture, say a camel which has never existed. What would your advice be to missionaries when they have to translate words from the Bible so that they make sense in the culture in which they are in?
Okay, you're in error in one place. You kept saying in the culture. And that's this new thing. I mean, come on, guys. You go down and buy a woman's King James Bible and a man's King James Bible and the teenager study Bible, and that's marketing. Who says the Bible has to appeal to somebody's culture? If you think about it, everything about the gospel was contrary to the culture of the day when they were worshiping other gods, and then you come along and say, no, there's only one God, and his son died for you. You don't need to make all those sacrifices. That was anti-cultural. So you don't appease the culture, you change the culture to meet truth. So I'll give you an example, because I'm an American, and people love throw stones at Americans. And I get these guys, they go, well, you Americans, you think it's all got to be like you? No. I'm an American. I was talking to some Koreans. I was over in Korea, and I said, you guys got something I don't have, and they liked that. And they said, what? I said, you got a language. No, they don't speak Korean. It's actually called Hangul. But they have a language. I'm an American. I don't have a language. I'm using someone else's. I'm using England's. And when I say this is an English Bible, I don't always mean it's English-like language. I mean it's an English Bible, not an American Bible. So when I read in the Bible, I'll give you an example. You go to the airport here, and listen, it'll say flight 247 has just landed. Go to England, and it'll say flight 247 has just alighted. So when I read in this King James Bible that they alighted, I'm not reading an archaic word. I'm reading a different culture, and it's not mine. So you know what I do? I say this is right. I'm not saying we should take lighted, you guys are going to laugh, but it's like he alighted from his donkey. All right? And I'm not going to say, it should say he climbed down from it. Well, that's what he did. And in American English, that's what we would say. But I don't want American English. I am an American. I don't want an American Bible. I want an English Bible. I'm talking about language. I'm talking about England Bible. So why is it any different for me as an American to say, I don't want a Bible in my culture, or I don't demand one, and then somebody else will say, well, I want one in mine. Well, get over it. So I hope that'll help. You do not change the Bible to fit the culture. You correct the culture. I'm in New Guinea, and this fellow says, this missionary says, these people had trouble where it says the man built his house upon a rock. Because they said, well, because see, they built a rattan shack, and they just stick it on the ground. And if you stick that on a rock, the water's going to wash it off. But the Bible says you put it on a rock. But that's because we build a house with a foundation that goes into it. And if you put a foundation into sand, then the water's going to wash it away. But the rock it'll hold. So he had to totally explain that their thinking was backwards. But the option would have been to literally switch what the Lord said. Yeah. And you don't change the book to fit the culture. You change the culture to fit the book. So I get this from guys. Oh, well, I'm not going over there to make them Americans. I said, well, you're going to tell the ladies that wear nothing from the waist up to put something on? And are you going to tell the guys you can't have 4 wives? And you can't beat them like you want to? You are going to change the culture. No, I'm not trying to change them to an American culture, but the American culture has been framed by this book. So we're going to try to change them to a biblical culture. So we change the culture to align with the book. We don't change the book to align with the culture. The culture was the problem in the first place. Another question. Okay, 10-second question with a 4-minute answer. Okay, would anybody like to shower me with gifts then for the next 4 minutes? All right, then I'm done. Lord bless you.
Okay, that was rich. That was good. You have been exposed this morning to a tremendous morning. And follow up on it. Follow up on it all that you can. Agree with all that Brother Gipp said and how well said this morning. And we want you to be able to dismiss on time, to go to your job, to make money, to pay your bill. Amen. Let's stand.